Welcome to The American Story. Stories about what it is that makes America beautiful. Heartbreaking, funny, inspiring, and endlessly interesting. This is Chris Flannery with the Claremont Institute. I call this one Battle Hymn of the Republic. It is not every day that a poet sits down and writes a poem that becomes a national hymn. But that's what happened to Julia Ward Howe on November 18, 1861. The country had been in a state of civil war for a little over half a year, and she and her husband, both prominent abolitionists, were visiting Washington, D.C. at the invitation of Abraham Lincoln. With a friend, the Reverend James Freeman Clark, they visited Union Army camps and passed some time in the carriage singing Army marching songs. Among them was the popular and sometimes earthy John Brown's Body, set to the melody of a Methodist campfire hymn. The Reverend Mr. Clark suggested that his poet friend consider writing her own more elevated lyrics to the song. Howe had the same thought. Later that evening, she returned to the Willard Hotel. In her words, "I went to bed and slept as usual, but awoke the next morning in the gray of the early dawn, and to my astonishment found that the wished-for lines were arranging themselves in my brain. I lay quite still until the last verse had completed itself in my thoughts, then hastily arose, saying to myself, I shall lose this if I don't write it down immediately. I searched for an old sheet of paper and an old stub of a pen which I had had the night before, and began to scrawl the lines almost without looking, as I learned to do by often scratching down verses in the darkened room when my little children were sleeping. Having completed this, I lay down again and fell asleep, but not before feeling that something of importance had happened to me." Here are the verses she had written down. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. I have read a fiery gospel writ in burnished rows of steel. As ye deal with my contemners, so with you my grace shall deal. Let the hero born of woman crush the serpent with his heel, since God is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea, with a glory in his bosom that transfigures you and me. As he died to make men holy, let us die to make men free, while God is marching on." Most of us have heard some of these verses more times than we can count. When we read them, we hear the melody that attends them, which we know by heart. And between them, we hear the absence of the glory, glory, hallelujah chorus. Just a few months after these lyrics came to Mrs. Howe, they appeared on the front page of the Atlantic Monthly. Editor James T. Fields paid her $5 for them and is credited with giving them the name by which we know them, Battle Hymn of the Republic. With the accumulating sacrifices made in its transfiguring cause, the hymn became more deeply sacred each time it was sung by Union troops marching to battle over the next 3.5 years of war. As Americans marched faithfully on through the following 160 years, the words and melody grew more sacred still. In the course of human events, they may yet become even more perfectly interwoven with the mystic chords of memory connecting every generation of Americans with one another and with the truth that makes men free. This is Chris Flannery, and I'd like to enlist your help in getting the American Story podcast to more people. If you haven't done so already, please download a podcast app on your phone or tablet. Then subscribe to the American Story on that app. It's free. The app subscriptions push us up in the podcast rankings. The higher we go up, the more people are exposed to the American Story podcast, the more people that will download for the first time, and the podcast grows and grows. And we have been growing, so I want to say a big thank you to all of our subscribers. This is Chris Flannery with the Claremont Institute. Thanks for being part of the American Story.